Hey, family, this is me, Bishop John Solders, and welcome again to another installment of thing we call Relevant Conversation with yours truly, John Solders. I am very, very pleased again to be here with you tonight, or whenever you view this, either on Facebook, Twitter, X, or YouTube. And certainly feel free to like or subscribe. It helps us, with all the analytics and such, to do so. I am pleased again to be with you with two of my friends. Can I just say that people that I hold very dear to me, and we're going to chop it up a little bit around something that I think, in my opinion, my humble Black man's opinion, that's what I'm gonna call it, something that changed the whole wide world, and that's the Montgomery Bus Boycott in 1955, December 1st. We'll characterize this and talk a bit more about it. And I like what one of our guests said is, how we remember what happened. It's problematic. Problematic. And so we're gonna tease out some of this, and I would tend to agree, because there's a romanticization of what happens in these moments, and we don't, a moment will occur, but before the moment occurred, I say it this way: when there's a story, there's always a backstory. Yeah, when something is going on, my grandmama would say it like this, Reverend. My grandmama would say it like this. She would say, "Baby, you want these new preachers. Now you just young in the ministry." She said, "Don't you just get up there and get one scripture and go to talk. At least read the chapter before that scripture and the chapter behind that scripture, because you got to put that text in context." I know. She that was my first that was my first lesson in hermeneutics, right there. And so I believe in the same way we gotta put whatever we're talking about in a broader stream of context. Let me bring my guests. The first I'll bring is a dear colleague of mine at Trinity College. Well, she has had the privilege of being on the job long enough to say, "I'm retired, bye-bye." So she is functioning as let me give you the proper, let me just so that folk don't come for me later and say, "Well, you didn't introduce her right." Let me give, she is the Paul E. Rather Distinguished Professor of History Emerita. All right, and and she's done lots of different work, got all the prerequisites, went to Princeton and Columbia, just got all the paper, and spent the vast majority of her work both in writing and teaching in and around civil rights, the civil rights era work. And she's a dear friend. I've lectured in her classes before, and she's been very supportive of our work here in Connecticut. Dr. Cheryl Greenberg, come greet the peoples. Let me bring you in from the green. Well, if I could just push the right button. If I could just push the right, there we go. There we go.
Hi, everybody. It's so great to be here.
Thank you. And let me bring my distinguished brother. We've been knowing each other a long time. He come from the country, but he cut his teeth in the city, and then he went back to the country, and then I don't know what happened. Something happened to him, and then he changed all the way around. I don't know what happened to him. In these days, let me just talk in the present days. He is the lead minister and pastor of a very interesting and growing and quite distinguished faith community in Seattle, Washington, called Valley and Mountain. It is an interesting community, and maybe he'll talk a little bit about where he situates himself as pastor. He's a theologian, he's an artist, he's a musician, a singer. He's got some credit out here in these streets. And when Ferguson jumped off, the person who said something was going wrong or going on in our hometown was this brother right here. And I am pleased that we walk together in life and in ministry together. The Reverend Osagyefu Sekou. Come join the people. Now I'm having the same problem again. I can't find the right buttons. It's this old thing. Okay. Now, there we go. Brother Sekou, greet the folks.
It's such a pleasure to be here, and also to be with such a distinguished historian, Dr. Greenberg. I'm deeply honored.
All right. Listen, thank you both for saying yes, and let's jump right on in. Let me. So most of us, I think you maybe have been, you probably were on Mars, and if you don't, missed this point of fact of history. December 1st, 1955, Mrs. Rosa Parks was arrested in Montgomery, Alabama. Now there's a whole lot of characterizing of what she was doing. She was just tired, and so that's the first telling of something that's gone left and wrong. So that's the first. We'll get to that in a moment. And she was arrested. By the time this thing, went around in Montgomery, it got to Brother E.D. Dixon, who doesn't get his just due in the middle of this. He was the head of the NAACP, was an organizer with the Pullman, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Workers, the Pullman car workers, and a leader. And it was Brother E.D. Nixon that ultimately got other folk involved. I also like to tell part of this story, nothing would have happened if it had not been for Professor Joanne Robinson, who in the stealth of night went there to get some mimeographing and carrying on. So there's a lot of people and pieces. And of course, now we can celebrate, the Reverend Dr. Ralph Abernathy, and of course the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. But some of the other folk get missed in the storytelling of this. And so December 1st, by then, tomorrow's date, December 5th, a one-day bus boycott went on for over a year. And so let's talk about this. And let me first say, Professor Greenberg, what is one of those things that gets missed? Some of the storytelling that goes around.
Well, I think at least when my students come in to my civil rights class, they know all about the bus boycott. They know that it was led by Martin Luther King, and that and Rosa Parks and right. And what they don't know is the women's political caucus that began it. Right, they had been working for 10 years already on this issue, and that's okay. Women always get forgotten, and that's a problem. But the other thing that I find even more problematic is that they all say, "Oh, Martin Luther King, he led the march." Well, I mean, the effort, and he did in a way. He was the head of the Montgomery Improvement Association. But what people don't realize is that he ran it because he wasn't Martin Luther King. I don't know if that makes any sense, but right, there were factions in the town, and if one faction ran the boycott, then the other faction wasn't going to participate, just like everybody everywhere, right? So they looked around for somebody who wasn't known. And there's this guy who just came to town. They said, "Oh, let's ask him." Martin Luther King. Well, it turns out he was a brilliant orator. He was fabulous, right? But the point is, he led it because he wasn't Martin Luther King. So what that says to me, and why I think it's on my rant here, is that what my students come in thinking is that all you need is another leader like Martin Luther King, and we're done. And I want to say, but you don't understand. No, none of these people were leaders when they started. These were activists. These are regular people like you who rose to the occasion. Rosa Parks' background and all that kind of stuff notwithstanding. So to me, the whole message is distorted to let's wait for somebody to save us rather than we have the power of the people. That's my rant.
But Sekou, answer that same question. What comes up for you that we often miss or mischaracterize or actually don't get it right at all?
Well, I think one of the things that Dr. Greenberg can correct me on the numbers, because I'm a theologian and the historians tend to always say, well, actually. So you can correct me on my numbers. There are about 120 some odd Black churches in Birmingham, in Montgomery, and only about a dozen participated in the organizing of the Montgomery Bus Boycott. And so I feel like one of the myths that young people encounter, in addition to the kind of soul leader, is this idea that particularly the institutional Black church was somehow unified in its struggle over and against white supremacy. In fact, I think a key moment after on December 4th, I do believe, there is a set of leaflets that go out by Black preachers who have cut deals with the city fathers, saying that we're not going to have the bus boycott. But what that wound up doing was is that it actually got more information to the Black community. So it actually had the reverse effect, right? So because, the city got more money than the Montgomery Bus Improvement Association, so they can put more flyers out. And so part of it was the kind of cowardliness of Black preachers. And I think the other piece is, in King's first negotiations with the city fathers and the bus company, he makes this real interesting statement. He says, we're not trying to end segregation, we're trying to make it more humane. And so what happened is that they were kind of negotiating against themselves. And then when the city fathers refused to even concede a more humane request, then we see an extension, a commitment to a year. I mean, a longer than a day, because it began as a day-long protest. And so I think those two things are that the politics of the boycott evolved, and the political resolve, and this idea that all Black churches were involved, I think is a failure in witness, because I think it sets up organizers today against a mythos. So when they're crushed, when Black churches don't show up for Palestine or for Black Lives Matters, they're operating over and against a romantic discourse. And then the third thing I would raise is that Rosa Parks was an organizer. Right. So I think part of what gets and I think Sister Throjas at University at Brooklyn College has done her wonderful biography on the life of Rosa Parks. Um, um, is that, you know, she had been organizing, you know, for at least a decade, had already been the state director of the Alabama NAACP, was doing very dangerous work of investigating sexual assault against Black women by white men, was one of the lead opponents, probably second only to Ida B. Wells, on the question of raising the question of lynching in the U.S. And so I think all of those, Rosa Parks as an organizer, the evolving politics of the Montgomery Bus Boycott, and a mythos around the participation of the Black church.
Can I just jump in for a second on your Rosa Parks piece, because I think it's so important. It's not just that she's an organizer, so she knows how to do it. She's very conscious of what's happening, right? She's not some poor, tired person, as you said. But also that the bus boycott wasn't just about where people sat. It was about the sexual harassment of Black women riders by white male bus drivers. And we don't talk about that either. We don't talk about the whole sexual harassment piece of the civil rights struggle. So I'm just glad you raised that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
See, so, you know, I read. Sekou. Let me just say, I read.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you know that you see this book, but there's a book called Twice Toward Justice, and it's a children's book, really. But it is Claudette Colvin's story. And here's one of the things that we don't really share widely, is that the strategy of an arrest was a women's strategy, the women's political group, where Joanne Robinson was actually very involved in helping to organize. So thank you all for talking about what women were doing. This wasn't the preachers and the boys. These were women who were doing the grunt work of really both getting themselves ready and organizing. And Claudette Colvin got arrested first. There were actually 4 women. There were 4 women for which they would do kind of on a rotating basis. They would stir this. And in fact, Mrs. Parks kind of didn't go, she went off script. She was supposed to move, and she did. She said, I'm sick of this. Well, she may have said something else. Knowing a Black woman, she may have said something else, but she wasn't tired and, you know, going home, and she was sick of the game and went off the book script. Claudette Colvin actually got arrested, and there was conversation about should this be the moment? And because she was young and an unwed mother with dubious distinction that in that unweddedness, that they decided she might not be the right person. You know, so that's another bit of this story. And I had the distinct pleasure and I think privilege to speaking with Claudette Colvin. And
she is still alive. That's right. She's still alive.
That's correct. And she lives in New York City and had children and grandchildren and great grandchildren now. And having had her talk for a moment, remembering, right, and recovering the story that ultimately becomes what we know as the Montgomery Bus Boycott. That it took a while. Again, I'm just echoing what you two both have said. That again, for me, it's the context. It just ain't the thing. It's the thing that happened before the thing, and that happened before the thing, and that there were multiple people involved in this thing, and that it gets reduced to a kind of fairy tale story, right? If we don't unpack, some of what was going on there in Montgomery and in fact in Alabama, because there was certainly a connection between Birmingham and Montgomery. So So let's don't leave that out.
Mhm.
Also, this is in the context of what was going on in the country. So we had Brown versus Board of Education. We had Emmett Till's,
Mhm.
and we can't underplay what was on the mind of folk during this time. You know, Jet Magazine. I'm gonna say it again. Jet Magazine,
Mhm.
and what Mrs. Till gifted us with, allowing Emmett's remains to be seen in its horrific state. Though that was on the mind of black folk, and I would dare say white folk too. They were sniffing around something was going to maybe jump off. All right, and then you had the brothers and sisters and the brother Jameson, Reverend Dr. Jameson, and his attempt at a boycott in Baton Rouge.
Yeah, Baton Rouge. Yeah.
And in Baton Rouge. And Dr. King said, you know, we were thinking about what they did and what failed, what worked, what didn't work. So there's a lot of stuff going on here that lead us to December 1st.
Mm-hmm. And I was gonna say also, I just want to note that that I think also what happens is that when I think a lot of young organizers look back on that historical moment, we impose modern political discourses and context on that moment. And so there's like, well, it was all about respectability politics and that kind of thing, which is true. But we cannot imagine the terror that these people lived under. Right. And that there's a wonderful book by Grace Elizabeth Hale on performing race, where she talks about the ways in which, you know, black people would bow their heads in the presence of white folks and during this time, and that a wrong glance can get you looked. And then I think also another part of the context, right, is that this happens after the second Great Migration. Right. So you got masses of black people fleeing the Jim Crow South. My family moved to St. Louis in 1952. Right. You got masses of fleeing the Jim Crow South. There's all of these stories. So the memory of what they write. Right. You see at the same time, the Church of God in Christ is expanded northwards, buying huge, either a former Jewish theaters or former Jewish synagogues. Right. And it's at St. Stephen's. It's at Stephen's Church of God in Christ, where Emmett Till's funeral was held. And so Rosa Parks says that she's thinking of Emmett Till when she sits down.
That's right. Robert's Temple, by the way. It's Robert's Temple.
Robert's Temple.
And let me just say, Bishop Ford,
yes,
was the eulogist.
Yeah.
Who was the pastor of St. Paul.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got a very famous picture of him in vestments doing eulogy, which also doesn't get remembered. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No. But so at Robert's Church of God in Christ. And so, right. And so part of that, you know, some argue that actually Emmett Till's funeral is the first major protest of the modern civil rights movement, right? In terms of all of these people coming to see. And so and then I'm just thinking about, like, you know, Bayard Rustin and Ella Baker organizing in friendship, which helped send shoes and money down to Montgomery. It's in the Montgomery Bus Boycott that we see the crystallization. Bayard says to King, you know, wonderful film on Bayard Rustin now. Bayard says to King, Afro-American social protest and Gandhian nonviolence. It's like jazz. Right. And so, and what's interesting, if I might digress a little bit on this, when Bayard shows up to King's house in Montgomery, his armed guards won't let him in. It is Coretta who recognizes him because she was at the 1935 Progressive Party convention when Bayard spoke. And so she knew him. King didn't know who he knew his name, but he didn't know who he was. And so part of it is the fact that actually King's College, Xavier Kozer University, Kozer Seminary, where he tried to do a nonviolent arrest and got beat up pretty bad at a school. His college and university and graduate school activism is negligent compared to Coretta's. Is negligible compared to Coretta's. And so also I just want to add that part in terms of that we actually don't get an king to organizer or king to pacifist without a significant amount of influence by Coretta.
Yeah, and just to complicate things further, if I might, go back to something that you both said. Reverend Sekou, you mentioned respectability politics, and I just want to highlight that for a second and what it means for people who aren't familiar with that nerdy kind of term is how do you protest in such a way that you make your protest accessible and appropriate so that people don't think you're crazy or whatever. So much of the civil rights movement, especially the early times, were efforts to prove to white people that Black people were decent and Black people were reasonable and they should be allowed these things. And so, again, exactly as we were talking about, that's why they accept Rosa Parks and not Claudette Colvin, because it puts a bad face on it. They're going to say, well, of course she's bad. She's, a single mother, whatever. But so I just want to highlight what you said, Reverend Sekou, which is my students are always shocked when they realize that. And then I point out what people were living through and what, how incredibly dangerous every day was and how so this whole respectability politics that gets thrown out in the mid 60s, feminism and all that other kind of stuff is a sort of middle class movement, right, for credibility. And it has to be in a way. But it's also problematic because it leaves all sorts of other things out. And the other thing I just wanted to toss out was about Baton Rouge. Baton Rouge was a successful bus boycott. It was like 6 days long or something, and they won. And the reason we don't hear about it is they won. There was no event. One of the amazing things that happens over and over again in the civil rights movement is that you encounter someone who won't give in, and that gives you the visibility to say, whoa, that's going on. So it's not that Montgomery won't change the buses, it's that the people march, and it's over and over and over again, and that's what makes the headlines. And that's, I think, what's so incredibly powerful about so many events in the civil rights movement, right? Bull Connor is the reason that civil rights got where it was, and et cetera, et cetera.
Because in Alabama and because in Albany they ignored them.
They did.
Exactly. And so we don't know about it.
So you get 50. So 56 King is a visible letter to leader of the civil rights movement, and I think Albany's 62. Is it 62?
62 or 63.
Yeah, about 60 is 62, and they just don't respond. Right, they just ignored them and didn't arrest her, and so
that's the way to be. If you're going to resist a movement, just don't respond.
So they ignored them, and it is that failure in Albany and that lull between 56 and 62, right? Because we don't have any major victories up until 64, up until the passing, right? And so you get all these lulls, and so by 62 and that defeat in Albany, and actually King has lost credibility. That's one of the challenges of being the sole leader. He's lost credibility. None of the Big Six respect him. They didn't like him anyway because he was young, and they don't, right? And then Adam Clayton Powell is having a fit, because he's Adam Clayton Powell. Right? He's a character unto himself. I'm trying to think if there's a character in modern politics, modern Black politics, as flamboyant and egotistical as that cat, but nevertheless, is and so the between the Montgomery bus boycott and the March on Washington, there's a significant lull in victories in the civil rights movement, and so the March in Washington becomes an attempt to actually revive the movement, then it is met with the bombings in Birmingham.
What we did have is what occurred in Birmingham right before. So King gets arrested, and the letter from the Birmingham jail happens. He goes in Good Friday.
Yeah.
That spring. So I think,
but the letter doesn't get published for.
Yeah, it doesn't get published, but people, both what he was responding to gets published.
Yeah, this is true.
That's right. The action. I think you're absolutely correct. That you got what happened in Montgomery, and then there were a lot of right. There were attempts to try to get at this, and I think they were learning, right. So what Baird had proposed, and I often think about it. It's featured in this latest movie, by the way. If they had come putting some agenda on at the Democratic National Convention that Kennedy barely squeaked by, and then the general election where he barely beat the vice president at that time, Tricky Dick. And that's a different. What would have happened? What could have happened if what Baird Rustin had proposed, they turn up at the 1960 Democratic Convention? It was there that Adam Clayton Powell said, "No, there's a thing that we say about Negroes that are like that." Anyway, when he showed up and said, "You ain't gonna do it on my watch," and they shut it down because our St. Louisan brother Roy Wilkins joined in that. Again, there's all of this. There's stuff going on. Again, my grandmama's hermeneutical lesson to me: you get that context together. Don't just jump in there. You got to see what's going on. And I think it was those kind of, I won't call them defeats, but those disappointments that then was allowed to rise a little bit when we had the buses and Freedom Ride Summer, right? So that's going on there. Go ahead, Dr.
I was going to say, I just want to push back a little bit on what you guys are saying about that nothing's happening in between. Actually, a shit ton of things were happening. Sorry. But they were all happening on the local level. I mean, this is the sit-ins, this is SNCC, this is all of those local groups. And I think that Brown and Emmett Till have everything to do with that too, because this is a group of people who were in grade school when the promise came that they were going to be desegregated, and now they're in college or whatever, and nothing's happened. And they've seen the number of SNCC workers, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, members who said it was the picture of Emmett Till that radicalized them, right? And so there are all these young people suddenly organizing. The NAACP is trying to get a piece of them, right? And they say, no, we're going our own way. So it's piece by piece. They have a piece in Albany. They have a piece in rural places they're organizing. So they're doing all this stuff, but it's all under the radar, right? Because they don't have the kind of political power that's going to make the president do anything, right? So I totally agree about the lack of sort of visible national stuff, but I do think that there was a tremendous amount going on, particularly by young people.
Yeah, and I want to say,
Bishop Selders, that was an actually. I just want to let you know the historians always go to the view.
Actually, if I could push back on that.
And I want to chime in and to say that's absolutely correct. There were lots of things going on. What I guess Reverend Sekou and I were both kind of ruminating about is that there wasn't a kind of national visible thing. There were lots of things going on. Let's recall some of it. King went to Palestine, Israel in 1959. He went months before Malcolm went. So as we talk about what's the current events, we got to say there were Black people thinking of Dr. King and Mrs. King. Let me be clear. Both of them went. And Dr. King preaches Easter Sunday. He preaches on his journey to Palestine. That's his Easter message in the church at that time. So that's a significant kind of stuff. He was beginning to think through not just what was happening here. There was a trajectory globally, making some connections. Malcolm was doing the same thing. Malcolm was tearing it up. We got Islam here in Connecticut because of Malcolm.
Mhm.
So you're right, Cheryl. There were lots of things happening in individual states and cities. There were, and I would say there was the push-pull. Mrs. Ella Baker was organizing her behind off. So Slick jumped in there, and really, it was really because Dr. King and the old fogies wouldn't get out, the boys wouldn't get out the way. So she turned to the kids. So and all of that needed to happen in order for what happened in Birmingham and later to occur, right? We couldn't have any of that stuff.
And one thing actually, even back in the 1940s, CORE is doing this.
Yes.
Through Fellowship of Reconciliation.
Yes.
They're doing sit-ins in Chicago. They're dropping leaflets like from airplanes. It's unbelievable. All the stuff that we see, they've already started doing in the 30s and primarily in the 40s. And that's CORE. I mean, that's adults and young people who are pioneering a lot of these efforts even before.
You know something, Professor? The CORE does not get its due. And I think it doesn't get its due as you're talking, in part because in the modern era, Ennis in particular made such a right-wing turn.
I think that's true. That's a good reason.
Right. I think in the modern, so like in the 90s, Corden made a full right-wing turn. I mean, Bayard makes also a right-wing turn too. We don't want to we forget about that. But I do think that you're very right in terms of all the things that are kind of happening and bubbling, and much as we talk about King as the heroic leader, much of that significant work that happens between 56 and 63 is done against his will. He don't want them to do the sit-ins.
Right.
He don't want, he was like, and he don't want them to do the sit-ins. He don't want them to do the freedom rides, right? In fact, the children, right, because it's the children getting water hosed that turns the international opinion against the U.S. That's James Orange and Bevel.
Right.
Because James Orange was a high school football star. And so he went and asked the kids to come and go to jail. And he could, right? Because he was a high school football star. Bevel, for all of his contradictions, was a master strategist.
Absolutely.
And understood that, I'll tell you a quick story. When I first met Bevel, he asked me, him and James Lawson asked me the first same two questions. I said, I'm running an action. They says, have you walked the site? I said, no, sir. They says, you're not serious. And the second question is, what are you reading? And I told them I was reading Albert Camus. And they said, you're not serious. Right. And so they were both master theoreticians, like, you got to walk the site. You got to time it. You need to know how many people is going to take the field to jail, how many people to block a street, and what are the risk of children getting arrested and that kind of thing. And so he, and all of that is against King's wishes. He's like, no, I don't think we need to do that. And I think part of what we miss in terms of King's psychology, and it's one of the things that gives me grace around the whatever failures Black Lives Matters, the organization made. We cannot imagine the weight of the aspirations of an entire people on your shoulder.
I think, to underscore something else that you're saying, we also can't underestimate, although my students always do, the difficulty in getting those marches to work. I mean, my students sort of think people get up out of the classroom and off they go, or they get onto the street corner and off they go. And they don't appreciate that every single one of these efforts had people there to take care of them when they got hurt, had people contacting the press, had people, right? All of that stuff behind the scenes was crucial for them to get anywhere. And no one ever pays attention to that. And I just want to highlight that because you referenced it, but the organization that it took to do those things. I went through a lot of the material that the Mississippi Sovereignty Committee, which was the group that spied on the civil rights movement. They
Mm.
had lots and lots of stuff on SNCC and CORE. And I'm telling you, they had nightly phone calls from every single little teeny town. Okay, what happened today? What happened yesterday? How did it get dealt with? What was his name? Who drove the car? Right? All of this stuff behind the scenes was what made it happen.
I
So
mean, yeah.
I just want to emphasize that.
No,
That
yeah,
also
no.
never
Yeah,
got
like,
credit.
yeah. Are you like, and I think one of the things that and it's one of the things I do in my trainings with young people is that the higher level the decentralization, the higher level the discipline. Right. So for every one cup of rice, you need 2 cups of water. Right. And so I think one of the challenges is that because, and I really appreciate you. I'm teaching a course on Black Lives Matters and the Legacy of King in March at Seattle University. So you pray for me, and or pray for them. But it's helping me understand that, like, a lot of time is that, like, a lot of times, and it might be the way media flattens culture out. I think it is also around the single strongman story that people forget the level of political discipline, insight, and logistical work, and how much that actually matters. And one of the challenges is that in a celebrity-driven culture, where people want it, like, even I was thinking about this the other day, that the discourse about a social justice influencer or a Christian influencer, when our movements historically have always been about power, but there's a way in which we concede linguistically when we say we're influencers. Right, and so because because the best of our movements has always been about shaking the halls of power, right, and making them tremble and making them have concessions, right. Whereas that an influencer gets a photo op, right. They get a photo op, maybe a sponsorship, but it's not really about what it takes. That the best way to say it, low technology, labor intensive organizing is going to beat anything any day.
You mean you don't think those little black squares were useful?
I actually think so.
I actually think they were in a certain way, but I hear you.
I think the issue is that like, at my age, I don't do vanity arrest anymore. You know, when you call the police and you tell them you're coming and you're gonna pray, and then they're gonna get you, tell you where they're gonna take you. But I do believe, for a lack of a better word, a vanity arrest can be a gateway drug. Right, like it can be an entree into a on ramp into broader social movements. And so I try not to, like, publicly poo-poo. I try to be among the positionality of yes and. Oh, that is nice that you put that box up. And won't you come to this meeting?
And I'm glad that you're not poo-pooing it, because Bishop Selders is the one who got me to do that photo op arrest. So I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Of course.
So but for me, and listen, part of them that kind of strategy I get from him. So he can't poo-poo on too much, because all of it, right? He can't poo-poo on too much. All of it is because the arrest ain't the thing. See, that it's the thing we get attention to point to the thing, right? So it's a tool. Sometimes that tool works great. It's not the only tool in our toolkit. Of course, it's not, right? I think that, let me go back. We're fastly moving toward the end of this little bit of hour, and we have gone far afield, which is what I wanted to do. Here we have what was really proposed to be just a one-day bus boycott for the purposes of freeing up. See, here's another one that I get from Reverend Sekou, straight from his playbook. If you're gonna turn up, if we're gonna do an action, there must be a political end to it. What change are we proposing to make? Otherwise, we just mad. And right now, we got a lot of folk that's out there and they occupy streets because they just mad. And I ask, well, what's the end? What you trying to do? They don't have a thought around that. We trying to get our voice out there, you know.
But I think part of the reason why, and there's some writing on this, I can't remember the text about it, is that part of the moment, one of the epistemic glues of the civil rights movement, I think it's twofold. One, primarily agrarian people who have a relationship to the land and have intergenerational relationships. And so that makes you move a very different kind of way. So for instance, we see this among in Cuba when Fidel encounters the peasants. We see it when Subcomandante Marcos goes into in the rural area talking all his Marxist theory, and the farmers look at him and they say, "You know how to plant corn." That's nice. You know how to plant corn. Right. And so I think that so part of it is, I think that kind of, and I'm not romanticizing that time. I'm just talking about what the epistemic frameworks are. And then I think the second is that people belong, right? So you got to think in of the 50,000 folks who went to Freedom Summer, I believe it's about half of them Jewish. Right. If not more. Right. Yeah, you're right. By half of them. I actually think it's the institution you work with in Boston that holds those archives. The Jewish Women's do you know the Jewish Women's History Society? They hold a lot of those archives. Sister Rose, a partner, helps run that. And so but what's common about those kids who go, those Jewish kids who go, and those Black kids who go, is that that their relationality to their community's faith institutions. And what happens in those communities' faith institutions, you develop common languages, and that's where you build bonds of mutuality and trust in those institutions with all those contradictions, right? Whereas that for a lot of young people now, because of post-civil rights, more secular society, a higher critique of the sexism, misogyny, homophobia in these religious institutions, they sit outside those institutions. And one of the challenges is that we don't have institutions to replace them from where you have a notion of womb to tomb. You have a notion of mutuality and bonds and networks and common language. So the protest then itself becomes the ritual that religious institutions used to do. So people we had a great protest, no demands, right?
Actually, I agree with you about the structure, but I have to say that what's so interesting about the Jewish participation is that it's not basically religious. Ooh. It is primarily leftist Jewish kids of leftist Jewish parents. These are former Marxists, even current Marxists. These are socialists. These are people who've been raised on social justice stuff. If you look at the religious connections of these people, the Jewish folks, if they're related to any of the flavors of Judaism, it's primarily reform. If it were a religious thing, you'd have the Orthodox down there. There are very few Orthodox people. So, Abraham Joshua Heschel, everybody says, oh, Abraham Joshua Heschel. He's one of the very few religious people who was on board. That's not to say that Jewish religion doesn't preach that stuff, as of course Christianity does too. But in fact, most of the Jews came from the left. And that's why it's so funny to me when they talk about the Jews. Actually, it's not the religious Jews, right? Even though it's true, our religion teaches us these things, But I just wanted to point that out. But I do agree about the intergenerational thing, because the whole Marxist socialist milieu is also exactly that kind of structure. So I agree with you about the structure.
Yeah.
I just
So where are the institutional lives then of these young people? Is it inside the Jewish worker circle
working
or
circle. Oddly enough, there's socialist camps that all these kids went to these socialist camps.
Matter
right?
of fact, the one
Zionist
that's in
camps.
upstate New York that's been going on for 70 years. I have
Exactly.
I know the one you talk about.
Yeah. So and some of them come out of Reform Jewish stuff. I mean, again, the Reform movement is the closest to the social justice wing, and they're very active. Again, I don't mean to minimize that. But when the rabbis come and march in the South, which they do, they're primarily Reform rabbis. There are some conservative rabbis. There are almost no Orthodox rabbis. So it's not that there's not a structure. It's that it's not religious in exactly it's like the split you were talking about in the Black community, right?
Yeah.
Some churches are for it and some are against it. So, it's actually complicated.
And I want to recover that. This is fascinating because when we start to talk about what happened in Montgomery, we're very clear. The church folk wasn't really in on this. Now I know you got King, you got Abernathy, who are the named leaders, right? But it was the other structures of organizing. It was Joanne Robinson's group. It was E.D. Nix. This could not have happened without the two of them, because they were and Mrs. Parks and her bunch of women. Those were the folks that were on the ground. And when the one day becomes a year-long movement, they had to then deal with how you set structure. Where are people gathering? How do we hold the line? The whole idea of recruiting rides for folks. There was a whole, and then who was going to be having the conversations with the powers that be while also holding the line, on the everyday, making the phone calls. I mean, it is Coretta driving a car, driving their car, driving her and Reverend King's car, as well as and she had a baby. So
what ends the bus boycott is a court case, brought by the NAACP, right? That says, sorry, the Supreme Court says can't segregate.
And I just want to add is that part of it. It reminds me of Tahrir Square when everybody was going on about it was the internet movement. It was they tweeted a revolution, and so I'm watching this thing. And I see 4 stages go up in 2 hours. And I said, Twitter don't build no stage. It's the unions. Because the unions had already shut down the ports in Alexandria. They had been doing that for a decade over labor questions, right? U.S. funds, the military apparatus to crush them. But they had already been organized. And so I think also that we forget. I think one of the things I'm trying to get at, and thank you for helping me refine this, Professor Greenberg, is that part of the epistemic knowledge of a community has to do with what your craft is. The Pullman porters knew about buses, about stuff being on time and logistics.
Right.
And so you don't get that, right? This is why A. Philip Randolph worked so closely with Rustin, and that the March on Washington ends 15 minutes ahead of schedule. Right. I'm convinced only a gay Black man could make that happen. But right. You see what I'm saying? But it has to do with they knew about timing and logistics and like what you're describing, the phone calls and the checking in and that kind of thing. And that I think a lot of times the 2 things that people miss is women's work in the civil rights movement and the labor movement, because the labor movement actually provides lots of the infrastructure and the logistic, and one of the the way the old that old line kind of pre new left labor movement was you had discipline to the shop was over everything. And so I think all of that is informing how we're able to see how many black folks was it, 50,000 or something? It was something crazy. How many black people was in the bus boycott? I just had it up. It just slipped my mind.
I was going to say everybody, but I don't know what that number is.
But I mean, I think I'm on the King Papers website, and how many? 13 months.
I know that the time is close up, but I also want to say I know we have to bring it, at least in my sense, up to the current time. One thing I have really one thing I have really been impressed with Black Lives Matter is, in fact, that it is built from all these small local groups, all of whom do have an agenda and all of whom do have things that they want to get done. And I think that, again, is a huge and necessary piece of moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's right. I was thinking about this, and it reminded me of something Langston Hughes wrote. He said, I swear to the Lord, I still can't see why democracy means everybody but me. And so for me, we have the gifting of this thing that happened in 1955 through 1956, and the ultimate, win that kind of is, within the context of the stories that happened before, so the backstories that get us to this wonderful moment of King with the local folk, and also Baird thinking about Gandhi, and what we can do, not just here in Montgomery, but throughout the South, and maybe we can move to the North. We know what happened in the North. We got distance and time and history now to tell us that the strategies that work down South didn't necessarily work up North in the same way, right? So we got a thing going on here, and that quite honestly, it took those what you would name the unions and the organizers, the precision of how do you build a sustained movement. That takes, I just done a couple of them things and was wore out and said, look here, listen. And I happen to know you, Reverend Sekou, you ain't doing no more than Ferguson work. No. No. That was it. You move on. It's how do you sustain works? And so my last bit of this, and certainly this is up to revisiting over and over again. Again, I appreciate you all coming on tonight. What are the gifts then now, as we look in this current moment? We had Black Lives Matter, and then we had Black Lives Matter 2.0, right? That happened during the pandemic summer of 2020. Now we in this kind of new moment. There's always a political upheaval of some sort or another, and don't get me started with the Orange Man. I'll just say it like that. But the left ain't too. I'm struggling. There doesn't seem to be what we need to be doing either. What any of us need to be doing. And I'm not trying to be partisan. I'm just, there is just so much happening here. And then all of the strivings certainly going on, what's going on in Palestine, Israel right now. But not just there, obviously Ukraine and Russia are still at it. That ain't changed. But let's take a look all throughout the world. This ain't the only thing. Kashmir is a mess. It's a mess in the Congo. That's a mess in all the different versions of what's happening. Nigeria just claimed some, and I don't know, that's tenuous. And what we don't hear about at all is Ethiopia. Ethiopia's in the mess. Let's bring y'all don't like it over there. Let's bring it to this hemisphere. We still got border problems all throughout the United States South and Southwest. You got Central America is all kind of way crazy, with all kinds of political upheavalments. And then South America, please.
Well, and climate change is going to make it all worse.
Peru. So it's stuff going on all over the place. And of course, thank you. My sweetie is in the midst of it. Haiti ain't never got fixed. since 1791.
Mm.
There's still struggle there. So here we are in this moment. What are the things that the bus boycott may portend for us? If you could dream out or think out loud in these last few moments, what might you what comes to mind? Shall I say? What comes to mind as you think about that? Are there things we can bring in and reel in or tease out for this current moment?
I mean, I will begin with, um, you know, we in the midst of what is happening in Palestine, we've never seen this many Palestinian voices in public discourse, and we've never seen such a fault line in the Jewish community on the question of Israel. Right. So I think that like, so if not now, as well as JVP and other Jewish organizations wrestling with the question of ranging from notions of genocide to apartheid to settler colonialism to returning to 67. There's a broad range of, I don't think that's a bright moment. It maybe is not be the best word, but that's a new moment. And then the most interesting thing, and I think this was a categorical stake on the part of Black Lives Matters. We do see some better movement among it with the movement for Black Lives, and I'm just talking about BLM as an organization, not as an idea. Is them organizers, brother Christian Small and them organizers in them Amazon warehouses, Trader Joe's, Starbucks, right. Like, so I feel like they're major wrestling around the fundamental questions of the crises that are generated by capitalism. I see. So those are two bright moments, and then I think what is interesting to me is I think, the next 8 months are going to be interesting around electoral politics. And I think something's going to emerge we can't anticipate, right? That's why my kind of opinion is that I train as many people as I can in militant nonviolent civil disobedience, right? Because the Marxist in me believes that out of quantity comes quality. Because just a possible scenario, Trump gets indicted or not indicted, but gets found guilty, can't run, but he'll run from jail. Right. That's just him. He gonna run from jail. Not what is the other group? No Labels with the brother out of West Virginia may run. Robert Kennedy still polling at 20%. Right. Cornel West in the race. That it feels like this election is going to be extremely contentious, but I think there are actually a different set of electoral possibilities that we probably haven't seen, and a professor will correct me, probably haven't seen this kind of electoral dissent since Lincoln's first run.
Actually.
Right. You know what I'm saying? Right. Or some of the contention around FDR and
maybe Nixon.
Maybe Nixon, right? But in terms of this kind of split,
yes,
in essentially the electoral college that we have not seen, and I think in that context, something unique organizing can emerge. My concern is that without enough discipline organizing, you wind up with a theocracy like you did in Iran, right? Because you get a social movement and then the Islamists seize power, right? And so I feel like interesting thing is happening. I'm not sure what's on the horizon You know what I mean? In terms of what are going to be the new political developments that will, seize public imagination and shake the halls of power.
Quickly, I agree. To bring it back to the bus boycott, I totally agree with you that we are at a moment, and I think the bus boycott was also a moment where the possibility was opened. Right, we had the Brown versus Board of Ed. We had all these conversations. We had the post-war conversations about what we now call diversity or multiculturalism, right? But all those sorts of things about what they call tolerance, right? The start of conversations, the start of pushback, all that kind of stuff opened up a space. And so I totally agree with you that we're in a space now where all sorts of things could happen. But I think that if you think about the gift of the bus boycott, I would say the gift is that with intention and with commitment and planning and that kind of agenda of possibility, people can make it. It really can work, and it will spring larger. Okay, it was in Montgomery and they succeeded, but oh my God, the movement that it spurred in many ways, that it seems to me is the gift of that moment, is that we could have another one.
Yes. So for this is very interesting. Both of you, the trajectory then of Dr. King's career, his public witness, is this 13-year trajectory, right? That begins here. This was the launch, right? And Vernon John's pulpit, no less, right? So I've had
and people, we should just know, Dexter Avenue fired Vernon Johns for being too radical.
Yes.
You should know that, and that Dexter actually thought King was a safe choice.
Boy,
surprise.
Yeah, and he was a second choice. The first choice was the great Samuel McKinney, who became the pastor here in Montgomery, at Mount Zion in Salem. He turns it down, and King becomes the second choice. And so it's funny. It's like when you bet wrong.
Yeah, when you put your stock in, and oh, he was the one. Right. It is for me, and this is the moment as change occurs. We situate all of what we've talked about is situated in the context of community. It's situated in the context of folk who is struggling to understand that a change has got to come, right? And so there was employment of different strategies, different ways to do it. We're talking about, in Montgomery in 55, 56, what then turns into 63, right? You get Birmingham, you get the March on Washington, and then you get Birmingham, right? So then Selma, right? So after the 64, wait a minute, let me stop. Right in the middle of this, Kennedy gets killed, right? So then Kennedy wouldn't have ever been able to pull off what Johnson was able to pull off, because Johnson knew that Strom Thurmond and knew where the bodies were in Congress. I mean, there's a whole heap of stuff, and Johnson gets underplayed as well, because much of the gains politically happened because of his idea of, he was trying to become another FDR, and so his idea was big, and it was context and big. So there's lots going on here. We got to put a pause on this right here. Go ahead.
I was gonna do well, actually.
Go ahead.
Now, I was going to say that the other piece is that, and I think is that not only what Professor Greenberg pointed out in terms of what happens in terms of like when you organize, how it inspires other people, right? Because people in South Africa look to the Montgomery Bus Boycott and find, in fact, South Africans are sending shoes,
Right.
from apartheid, right? So there's a, because they know something about walking, and so, but the but the other piece is what the civil rights movement does through that period, through those many multiple things that are happening, is that it opens up a possibility, because that's when we get a the lifting of the restrictions of Africans and Asians coming to America. We get new immigration policy. We get with new immigration policy, housing, civil rights, and Social Security is
Social Security is earlier, but certainly defendant rights, right?
Yeah.
In all sorts of stuff that, I mean, I was thinking when you said surprise, you didn't intend it, right? That Eisenhower appoints Earl Warren to the Supreme Court because Earl Warren was the one behind the Japanese internment, right? And then he turns out to be this sort of lunatic lefty who does all these fabulous progressive things. And Eisenhower's like, biggest damn fool mistake I ever made. Appointing him to the Supreme Court. So surprise again. But absolutely, it's a hugely important time.
And Johnson, people forget that these stories of him in terms of, like, he's, of course, he got contradictions and he races to the core, but he was the bully of the Senate.
That's right.
Right. And that sometimes he used his powers because he's such a big man. He would just lean over you. It's string in your face. Right. And you're right. While Kennedy is this kind of portrayed as the civil rights guy, he was actually quite cowardly around sending his brother through the FBI and the Attorney General to surveil the civil rights movement. Kennedy's famous conversation he wanted him to kick Jack O'Dell and Stanley Levison out of, and King has this wonderful phrase where he says, "Is not the gospel for the communists and the capitalists alike?" And he takes in the Rose Garden conversation, he takes a pastoral position, And so I feel like all of that, like people, well, I think going back to what we were saying earlier, there's a flattening out of all of this kind of crazy calculus. And that's one of the things that excites me about this electoral moment that we're in. Like the more variables, the more possibility that we could get some victory out of it.
Yep. This is why I wanted to talk about, and just to remember this date. This is December. As we do this is December 4th. Tomorrow, that bus boycott began a thing that I say changed who we were and who we are. And the we struggling with what who the we is. But that in that moment in 1955, something shifted in the atmosphere. There was a drop that then resonated across, not only in that time across the world, but across time, that still ripples and resonates with us. And it's what you both are talking about, these possibilities, the dynamics that are engaged here, that offer for us a way to see our way through what looks like a complete hot mess. And it does. In one way, I don't know what in the world is going on, and I think I want to run to Mars. They may be booking flights, So, let some of these ultra uber rich folks call it. So it is. Let me say thank you. We're way over time, and I appreciate both of you for sticking here with us and having such a robust conversation about all of the stuff we've been talking about. It is my hope that these kinds of conversations will spark and spur other conversations as we move through this time. I hope I can count on you both to come back and let's chop it up some more.
It would be my honor.
Okay.
Actually, it would be my honor.
Professor Greenberg done got something now. She gonna work that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
When you get something, you work it until it works out. Absolutely. Thank you again. Thank you again, folks. We'll be back at this again for more what we call relevant conversations. Thank you. God bless. Peace. We out.
Mm-hmm.